Have you ever wondered how the United States, a young nation by historical standards, rose so quickly to global leadership? How a handful of small colonies transformed into one of the world's most influential powers? The U.S. story is one of resilience, ambition, and striking contrasts. Join us as we explore this remarkable journey, from early settlements and the fight for independence to the political and social forces shaping America today. Long before European arrival, America's story had already begun. Approximately 20,000 years ago, early peoples crossed a land bridge over the Bering Strait, migrating into what is now North America. These early migrants, known as Paleo-Indians, gradually spread across the continent and developed advanced societies. Indigenous communities thrived with complex languages, religious practices, and cultural systems that varied across the continent. Each society had its own forms of governance and established trade networks that linked communities. The first European explorers to set foot in North America were the Norsemen, or Vikings, around the year 1000, led by Leif Erikson. While these Norsemen left only a light imprint, their expeditions opened the door to what Europeans would later call the New World. In 1492, Italian explorer Christopher Columbus, funded by Spain, made his voyage that would spark widespread European interest. By the early 1500s, Spanish explorers began colonizing parts of the Americas, laying the foundations of an empire with missions and trading posts. Spanish explorers like Juan Ponce de Leon and Hernando de Soto claimed vast territories for Spain, stretching from Florida to the southwestern deserts. In the early 1600s, English settlers established Jamestown in present-day Virginia, the first permanent English colony in North America. English settlers also came to New England, where the Pilgrims of Plymouth Colony signed the Mayflower Compact in 1620, a landmark of self-governance in North America. The English colonies each developed with distinct cultural traditions, economies, and legal systems. For example, the Puritans in Massachusetts promoted education and strict religious standards. Their leader, John Winthrop, articulated a vision for the colony's mission, proclaiming, "We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." This idea embodied the Puritans' sense of divine purpose and the belief that their community would serve as a model for others. In contrast, colonies like Rhode Island championed religious tolerance and self-governance, breaking away from the rigid norms of their neighbors. Other European nations, including the French and Dutch, established colonies in North America as well. The French built trading posts in present-day Canada and the Mississippi River Valley, trading furs with indigenous tribes and developing a cooperative relationship based on trade alliances rather than territorial conquest. The Dutch, meanwhile, established New Amsterdam, modern-day New York City, before English forces seized it in 1664. The 7 Years' War, from 1756 to 1763, called the French and Indian War in North America, pitted British and colonial forces against the French and their Native American allies. The conflict ended with Britain asserting control over former French territories, but it left Britain deeply in debt. To pay these debts, Britain imposed new taxes and trade restrictions on the American colonies. The most infamous taxes included the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, sparking resentment and organized protests among colonists who increasingly resented taxation without representation. As Britain tightened its grip, revolutionary sentiments intensified. In 1754, Benjamin Franklin had already proposed a unified government in the Albany Plan of Union, which sought to bring together the colonies under a central authority while remaining loyal to the British Crown. Although the plan was rejected, the idea of unity continued to grow. By 1775, revolutionary fervor erupted into open conflict in the American War of Independence. Colonists, organized under the Continental Congress, declared their grievances against British rule. In a passionate plea for freedom, Patrick Henry captured the spirit of the movement, proclaiming, "Give me liberty or give me death." The call for independence resonated widely, fueling the desire for self-governance. On July 4, 1776, they signed the Declaration of Independence, formally declaring the 13 colonies a new nation. Its powerful words asserted the core principles of the new republic. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. This document laid the ideological foundation for the emerging United States. Under the leadership of figures like George Washington, American forces composed of soldiers and local militias fought to protect their freedom and autonomy. The British initially dismissed the colonists as unorganized and unsophisticated. However, through perseverance and strategic alliances with France and Spain, the United States won crucial battles that gradually shifted the momentum. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, recognized American independence and marked the United States' entry as a nation. Following independence, the United States first operated under the Articles of Confederation, but the lack of centralized power and unified governance led to challenges. In 1787, delegates from each state convened to draft the U.S. Constitution, a framework designed to balance power between states and a federal government. Ratified in 1788, the Constitution set forth principles of democracy, separation of powers, and a Bill of Rights protecting individual freedoms. George Washington, elected as the first U.S. president in 1789, navigated the young nation through domestic challenges and established key precedents. He appointed a diverse cabinet and upheld the Constitution's vision of a federal government checked by multiple branches. The United States rapidly expanded westward. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the country's size, fueling exploration and settlement across the continent. The doctrine of manifest destiny took hold, promoting the belief that Americans were divinely destined to expand across the continent. As pioneers moved west, they settled new territories, often clashing with Native American tribes. Military campaigns forcibly displaced numerous indigenous communities, setting the stage for a century of westward migration. The U.S. acquired more territory through diplomatic and military means. In 1819, Spain ceded Florida to the United States. In 1845, the U.S. annexed Texas, leading to the Mexican-American War. The U.S. victory resulted in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which added California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of other southwestern states to U.S. territory. The expansion of slavery became a deeply divisive issue as the U.S. grew. Northern states, increasingly industrialized, opposed slavery, while southern states relied on enslaved labor for their agricultural economy. These tensions escalated with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, prompting southern states to secede and form the Confederacy. Reflecting on the nation's growing fracture, Lincoln warned in 1858, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." His words underscored the moral and political conflict threatening the country's unity. The Civil War, beginning in 1861, stands as one of the most impactful periods in American history, marked by significant loss and division. President Lincoln aimed to preserve national unity, and the abolition of forced labor became central to the conflict. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing enslaved people in Confederate states. The North's victory in 1865 abolished slavery, paving the way for Reconstruction, an ambitious but ultimately fraught effort to integrate formerly enslaved people into American society. At the war's end, General Ulysses S. Grant emphasized reconciliation, declaring, "The war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again." His statement reflected a vision for healing a nation deeply scarred by years of conflict. Following the Civil War, the United States experienced a period of rapid industrialization. Railroads, steel production, and manufacturing boomed, making the U.S. an economic powerhouse. However, this Gilded Age was marked by stark inequalities, political corruption, and harsh working conditions. During this era of rapid industrial growth, business leaders accumulated vast wealth. Figures like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie exemplified the rise of powerful industrialists. Yet Carnegie, reflecting on the responsibilities of wealth, famously declared in 1889, "The man who dies rich, dies disgraced." His philosophy of philanthropy emphasized the moral obligation of the wealthy to use their fortunes for the public good. Meanwhile, many workers endured grueling conditions in factories and on railroads. In response, labor movements and social reformers emerged, seeking improved conditions and fair treatment. Their efforts laid the groundwork for the progressive era in the early 20th century, ushering in reforms that aimed to address social inequalities and regulate industry. In 1917, the U.S. joined World War I, aiding the Allies and establishing itself as a major player on the global stage. However, the post-war economic boom was short-lived, giving way to the Great Depression in 1929. After a catastrophic stock market crash, millions lost their jobs, businesses failed, and the economy spiraled downward, leaving the nation in despair. In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of economic reforms aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform. Addressing the nation during his 1933 inaugural address, Roosevelt sought to inspire hope, proclaiming, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." His words encouraged Americans to face the crisis with resilience and optimism. Programs like Social Security and banking regulations emerged from the New Deal, leaving a lasting impact on the country's economic structure and laying the foundation for modern social safety nets. The U.S. entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, with President Franklin D. Roosevelt declaring it a date which will live in infamy. The attack galvanized the nation, leading to the mobilization of vast industrial and military resources to defeat the Axis powers. The Allied victory in 1945 elevated the U.S. to superpower status and positioned it as a founding member of the United Nations, committed to global peace and cooperation. However, a new global struggle soon emerged between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, sparking the Cold War. The arms race, space race, and alliances like NATO defined this tense era, which lasted for decades. A major symbolic moment came in 1987 when President Ronald Reagan, addressing Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, challenged, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." His words reflected the growing momentum toward the end of the Cold War and the eventual fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Domestically, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s transformed American society, achieving landmark legislation that prohibited segregation and advanced voting rights. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. became enduring symbols of the fight for equality, ushering in a new era of civil liberties and social progress in the United States. In recent decades, the U.S. has remained a leading force in global politics and the economy. Its federal structure, rooted in the Constitution, has proven resilient, with checks and balances guiding governance. The two-party system, dominated by Democrats and Republicans, continues to shape both domestic and foreign policy, reflecting the nation's evolving priorities and challenges. In his 1981 inaugural address, Ronald Reagan emphasized a shift toward smaller government, asserting, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem." His philosophy would influence American policy for decades, promoting deregulation and free market economics. Internationally, the U.S. supports key alliances like NATO and remains an influential member of the United Nations, actively engaging in global diplomacy and security efforts. American culture, technology, and innovation shape global trends, from Silicon Valley's tech advancements to Hollywood's entertainment industry. Reflecting on the nation's enduring spirit, President Harry S. Truman once said, "America was not built on fear. America was built on courage, on imagination, and an unbeatable determination to do the job at hand." This sentiment captures the essence of American perseverance, which continues to drive progress both at home and abroad. The United States' history is a testament to ideals of resilience, democracy, and self-determination. From a collection of colonies to a global superpower, the USA story reflects a nation committed to liberty, equality, and progress. Despite challenges, America's foundational values endure, making the U.S. an ever-evolving symbol of freedom and opportunity. This rich history continues to shape the lives of millions and inspire a future that builds on the promise of the American dream.